Hey, it's Anita, and this is the Anita FOSS Show. Hello everybody and welcome to the Anita FOSS Show, where it is my pleasure to keep you updated with topics related to Bitcoin on a global stage and also the local impact it has on communities and regular people. My guest today is Ben Ark from Wales. He is a FOSS hobbyist, advocate and educator. FOSS stands for Free Open Source Software. That's basically also what Bitcoin is. Ben has been building hardware and software for Bitcoin and the Lightning Network since around 2014. We are talking about the Welsh Bitcoin scene and also his projects like the Bowser, a DIY hardware wallet, or the Nostr messaging client, which could enable completely decentralized markets and social media apps. I think this is quite revolutionary what Ben is working on here. As always, you can watch this interview on YouTube and you can listen to it on the go as a podcast. You can find all the links to the podcast players and to YouTube on anita.link/subscribe. Before we start, a short word from my sponsors and then on to the show. Enjoy! Local Bitcoins is an easy, fast and safe way to buy and sell Bitcoin directly from person to person. Join Local Bitcoins to bring Bitcoin everywhere and secure your financial freedom. This week is Valentine's Day, and if you really love your cryptos, you should treat them well. That's why Coinfinity developed the Card Wallet, the professional cold storage solution. Order it now at cardwallet.com/Anita and get 20% off. Do you want to stay up to date with the things that happen in Bitcoin from my point of view? Then subscribe to Anita's Weekly, my newsletter with articles, videos, quotes, short tips on how to use Bitcoin and all that for free. Subscribe to Anita's Weekly at anita.link/weekly. Hello everybody. Hello Ben. Ben Ark is here today with us. Hello, please introduce yourself to our listeners and to our viewers.
Yeah, hello, I'm Ben Ark. I kind of do software, hardware projects in the Bitcoin space, all free and open source, and encourage education and people, learning to develop and build their own things and having a little bit more autonomy over the way in which they, interact with Bitcoin and Bitcoin devices. So that's kind of my main thing.
Okay, that's the short word for it is FOSS. I think it's free open source
FOSS,
software. Yeah. And
the free bit's very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the free part is very important. So why is free and open source software so important in general?
It's just, so there was a period where proprietary interests tried to claim ownership over developers' work. So, a developer would make a piece of software, and historically, people working with computers and developing programs, they're able to share those programs with each other very freely and openly. And if you wanted some functionality and your friend had worked on that, then you could take their code and put it in your code. And it was a science, and ideas flowed very easily. And then proprietary interests in the sort of late 70s tried to claim ownership over it and copyright over it, and got these developers to sign all these horrible non-disclosure agreements saying they wouldn't share the code and the software. And there was a few developers, like Richard Stallman, for example, who found this quite frustrating. So they said sod it, and they left their very comfortable, highly paid positions in places like MIT in California, and they went off to develop free and open source systems. The first thing they did was develop the Free Software Foundation. Richard Stallman did the Free Software Foundation, and the GPL license, which meant that you could license your software in a way where people could use it and distribute it, but they needed to, if they improved it, then they should share that code with the community and help the software grow and build out. And then I think it was more with Linus Torvalds and the Git stuff. So obviously Linus Torvalds was working on Linux with a couple of other developers. One of them, in fact, was in Swansea, in South Wales, where I am. They were working on Linux, and it was really kind of messy working on free and open source software at that time. So they came up with the Git way of project managing free and open source software. So, and with Git, you know what other people are working on, and it's not just that you're contributing to code. It's expected that you explain what you're doing, and you explain the code in which you've changed and what you've been working on, and that's kind of a big part of Git, which is why with every commit, you have to give it a message and talk through what you're doing, and that kind of helped people from treading on each other's toes. So that's what kind of became free and open source software, FOSS. But a lot of people will refer to open source, and I think it's important to because without it being free as well, as free as in free, not free beer, but that then it's not truly able for anybody to contribute to in a completely non-restricted way. So so free and open source software.
So does the free now mean it's free for developers to contribute, or does it mean it's free for customers to use it?
Yeah, so it depends on which license you're using, doesn't it? There's a whole bunch of different free and open source. All my stuff I license under MIT license, but yeah, there's a whole bunch of different FOSS licenses you can use. Some of them are kind of more open source, some of them are more on the free software side. But my MIT to me is kind of a nice general free and open, like FOSS, license.
I think also
but it's well worth people reading the licenses, the different free and open source licenses which are out there, and the slight nuances in the way they work is quite interesting.
I think the Bitcoin white paper was also licensed with the MIT license, right?
Yeah. And it had to be. This is the thing. Like when we talk about Bitcoin as this revolution, I mean, really, when you think of it, free and open source is the revolution, and Bitcoin is almost a sidechain off it. Like it just wouldn't be possible if we didn't have free and open source software. You couldn't have Bitcoin as a proprietary system. It wouldn't work because you couldn't vet the code and hack into the code and get it to do what you wanted, and you wouldn't know that there wasn't some malicious code in there trying to steal all your money. So without free and open source software, you wouldn't have Bitcoin.
And the MIT license enables basically using the code and building upon it, or what's the regulation, or what's the license say?
Yeah, generally that. I mean, I'm no expert when it comes to free and open source licenses, but yeah, MIT is, people can use it for free, do whatever they want with it. Actually, one of my favorite free and open source licenses is called the DBAD license, which is Don't Be a Dick, which is it's a bit silly, but people use this license. It's you do whatever you want with my software, do whatever I don't care, but give me some recognition, don't be a dick. Like if you make money off it, give me some money, don't be a dick. And quite good fun.
And that's an ethos that where you think like yourself would think, I mean, if somebody's using my stuff, then they should at least recognize me in a way and say it's mine.
I think that's very important, even to a point where you kind of almost overdo the recognition and the props in which you give to people, because you haven't got private ownership over this thing, but you've poured a lot of energy and time into it. And of course, you're not going to list absolutely everybody who's worked on the software, all the software you've worked on, and then all the libraries which you used. But I think it's important to if you to just try and give as much recognition as you can to the people who built the things which you're then building your own thing on, or you're using, or you're promoting, or you're sharing with people to say this is the source of where the information comes from. And again, Git is very good at that. So if you look at like a Git repo, then you can kind of see who the contributors are. You can see where the software starts, and that's often quite interesting. If you have in the Bitcoin space, for example, there'll be some software projects which are quite heavily attached to a certain name, and everyone will think of that person when they think of that software. But then if you go into the repo, you'll see that actually they're like the third biggest contributor, and there's a couple of people who are contributing a lot more and spending a lot more time on that software, which sometimes people don't mind. Like they don't mind having like a figurehead for a piece of software or whatever. But I think it is just it's almost like that concept of comradeship. Like you have to just acknowledge the work of others in a on a platform where people are just giving up their own time for the benefit of the larger community or or humanity or whatever, then I think it's just important to kind of give people recognition for that.
Because it builds your social reputation in a way, your name also.
I guess so, yeah. I guess so. I mean, maybe these are petty hang-ups from the concept of private ownership. I don't know, but I very much appreciate it if someone's using my stuff or whatever, or to say, oh, thanks to Ben Ark for building this thing, for spending hours and hours of his life.
So,
and in some ways, actually, I suppose this is a lot like, science in general. You do try and give recognition to people who've worked on things, but you are part of a conversation, aren't you, among people developing this larger thing than yourself. And in many ways, it doesn't really care about you. It's gonna, progression's gonna happen, and then you can choose to join in and progress something in a certain direction, or build software out in a certain direction, or build software which does a certain thing. But if it's useful, then it'll probably end up happening at some point anyway. And it doesn't care about you. If you then go off and die or whatever, it's not going to mourn you. It's just going to keep moving forward and progressing forward. And that's that's generally how science works. So there is a kind of ruthlessness. It's not all like hippy dippy. People sharing stuff and free and open source. There is kind of a ruthlessness to the whole process of it. But
But when you say it's free to use, how do you earn money? You also need to pay your rent, I guess.
Yeah, so a model which a lot of people use with free and open source is you'll have like a proprietary arm, so offering, obviously if you're the person who's made the software, like if you think about something like BTC Pay Server, for example, if you want to use BTC Pay Server, install it in a big company, then it makes sense to employ the people who actually make the software to do that for you, or as consultants, like spend some money on them as consultants. So a lot of that happens in free and open source projects. The people who actually, the people making the software, they're the people best placed to implement that software and help consult people if they want to implement it.
And let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin. How did you find Bitcoin, and when was that? And why did you decide it's important for you?
Well, I've got an awful memory, so I don't know when I found it. I'm hazy, but I know it was pretty so in the UK we were quite lucky. We had a lot of a news cycle on Bitcoin fairly early on. And it kept kind of coming back into the news. And actually, it was fairly positive, the news cycle in the UK, I would say. It was kind of interested in the concept of a digitally native money. I remember hearing things on the radio and so forth, and they were pretty positive. So we were quite lucky in that regard. I do remember I was at home for a period because I had an injury, and I remember researching Bitcoin quite heavily, but getting put off by the concept of mining and building a mining rig. And I think this is probably when people were still using graphics cards and things to mine, and then not thinking about it, but having this overwhelming urge to research it more, but just not having the time because I was busy working, So I guess that was kind of early on, but I was a victim of the 2008 financial crisis in that I did everything which people told me I should do, which is get on the property ladder. That's what you need to do. Particularly in the UK, we're obsessed with property in the UK. So I was a young guy, just got a job. I was having a baby and get on the property. So I got on the property ladder, and then the crisis happened, and within a very short period of time, I was in like tens of thousands of pounds of negative equity. And the particular apartment which I had was in a very saturated market, so it was incredibly bad investment. Very early on in my adulthood, and I was doing pretty well, like as a human being. I had a pretty good job. I was working as a teacher, but yeah. So I suffered in that crisis, and then later on when it came to sort of readdress getting a house and getting a mortgage and getting back on the ladder and all this sort of stuff, once all that had been sorted out and fixed, then I just couldn't do it. I just didn't like the concept of a credit rating, for example. The idea that people have all this information on you and they decide whether or not you're eligible for this rate or that rate or this mortgage or that mortgage. I hate that whole process, and the idea of building your credit rating through accumulation of debt. and you can't be a truly functional human unless you accumulate all this debt, which you then pay off just so you can build your credit report, so you can then lend money to own a house or whatever. So that just really frustrated me. So I was looking desperately for a free and open source alternative. I like the idea of having control over the things I'm running. So I run like Linux software. Operating system on my computer. You try and use all free and open source software. I always have. So it sort of made sense to try and use free and open source money as much as possible, and then encourage growth and encourage it to expand where and which it could. Each to their own ability, each to their own need is sometimes how I think of Bitcoin and how people contribute to Bitcoin. So yeah, I suppose that was probably 2013, 14, where I was like, okay, now I'm going to make a conscious effort to really invest time into this thing.
Mm-hmm. And by that time, you still were working as a teacher and in another job. But now I guess you are full-time working in the Bitcoin space.
Yeah, so I do. So in my own personal life, I got some little, what we call them, hobbles, little things I do to kind of earn money here and there. But then, yeah, like lnbits, for example, that's something, that's a piece of software which I've helped get off the ground, and that's starting to get traction. So there's more and more people interested in implementing that, and us being put in that position of being able to provide consultancy or helping people implement it. So there's more revenue streams which kind of open up, as it were. But I was very lucky because I had a little bit of a few sats lying around. So my teaching career was absolutely phenomenal. I really loved it. It was great. But I worked in specifically with kids with very severe learning difficulties, behavioural difficulties, and we were an expensive service. So when the austerity measures, again, this is the 2008 hang-up really, when austerity measures came in to try and claw back some deficit, then our services and services like ours were the first to get squeezed, which was heartbreaking because the kids we were engaging with really relied upon our service, and now there's plenty of them out there who haven't got a service like that for them to fall back on. Just because councils spend less money on such things. So it was quite nice at that time to be able to just say, okay, I've got a little bit of money saved now. I can take some time off teaching and then concentrate on this software, hardware development stuff and do something completely different for a little while. Maybe I'll go back to teaching at some point. I don't know. But yeah, it's, in my mind, it's the greatest job in the world.
And how is Bitcoin in Wales? Do you have a community there? Do people use it?
The Welsh, yeah. I think the Welsh have a natural affinity with Bitcoin. So the Welsh, they've been subjugated and oppressed by the English for a very long time, since Llewellyn the Great and the fall of the last Welsh king, so within British culture, the Anglo-Saxons, when they invaded, they pushed the sort of native Brits into all the corners, which is why all the Celts, the Irish, the Cornish, the Scots, and the Welsh, why we all kind of share cultural identity almost, and why also as well that the Anglo-Saxons, who was kind of the masters at that time, why they felt the need to kind of dehumanize and oppress the Celts over centuries. So I think the Welsh are very used to trying to find autonomy and self-sovereignty from a ruler. It's part of our culture, so I think we have a natural affinity to Bitcoin. I think we tend to gravitate towards Bitcoin. So the scene is pretty good in Wales, considering our population. We've got one of the largest, I think it may even be the largest Bitcoin meetup in the UK, which in Cardiff, during peacetime, it obviously hasn't been running during the COVID stuff. That runs in Cardiff, and that's so the Bitcoin Wales. If you want to look it up on you can find the meetup for it. We should be meeting up again soon. There's plenty going on in Wales. Lots of people interested in it. But yeah, it's we've got a small population, and I think because of that, maybe we don't produce as much stuff. But then in saying that, I think we maybe produce a lot more than the Scottish or Irish in terms of, well, maybe it's just my bubble, but I see a lot of kind of Welsh people within the Bitcoin Twitter and so on. working on Bitcoin stuff. So no, I think we have a natural affinity to something which gives us a little bit more autonomy and from being subjugated, which Bitcoin does.
Yeah, nicely. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your products or your projects. Did you start then doing coding for the Bitcoin blockchain, or did you immediately? Yeah. How did this evolve? Because I
was as I said, I was a teacher for years, and one of the ways in which I could engage the kids was through, working on like little hardware things. I was kind of techie and would work on little hardware projects, little microcontrollers and things. But my development skills are very, very limited. So I'm not, classically trained developer or anything. I've just kind of learned on the job, as it were. And when I started building things in Bitcoin, it took me ages. It took me such a long time to kind of get a handle on. So the first thing I did was when I went to, I went to the first Lightning hack day in Berlin, and there was someone there, and they had like a sweet machine and had a Lightning full node in, and you could pay for some sweets on a web app, and then it would spit the sweets out. And I looked at that and I was like, well, you probably don't want your full node in a sweet machine someone could just pick up and walk away with. You want your full node somewhere safe, and then this really wants to be like a follower device which connects to your node. So I thought, well, how can I do that? Well, I knew that these microcontrollers existed, and I knew that some of them were good enough that they could do like a HTTPS request. So I started working on that, and it was really I have to give again huge recognition to Fulmo and Christian Rutzel for setting up the Lightning Hack Days, and particularly because there's an emphasis on building things, and they were just very encouraging, even if they could see that I obviously didn't know what I was doing, but there was a kernel of a good idea there, and they were very encouraging in making me develop that idea and in trying to get other people to help me with that idea as well. So the first thing I did was get a microcontroller to do a request for an invoice, and then display that invoice as a QR on like an little e-paper screen display. And that took me like, I don't know, 6 months to get that far. But then once I'd got that, I was able to then plug in a switch, like a transistor, which would then switch on the little motor for the sweet machine. So you could pay the invoice, and it was just as a follower device. So there's no credentials in there. It's literally just there's the invoice key, macaroon, I suppose, but it's just requesting an invoice, displaying the invoice. You pay it, spits out some sweets. So then I was, what's also great about these hack days is you kind of, the people you meet who then encourage you to and give you all these ideas. So one of the hack days was in New York on Wall Street, and I met a guy called George Fasaro, and he was really interested in these little microcontrollers as well, and how we can, because all these Andreas talks from years ago where he would talk about the IoT, an Internet of Things sending all these microtransactions to each other. So it sort of makes sense to try and get these little devices to engage with Bitcoin and send microtransactions. So we were chatting at this pack day in New York, and we were talking about how cool it would be to have like a static, not have to use an e-ink display, to just have a static QR code which you could just hit, and then you could pay an invoice somehow and then get something to turn on. And he actually developed an arcade machine which had a sticker QR code on, and then he hacked a Claire wallet. So a Claire wallet, instead of when you scanned the QR code, it was actually a URL, and when you hit that URL, you got an invoice back for a certain amount, and then a Claire wallet would then pay that amount. So that's probably that would be the first example of like something which we're using now quite regularly, called LNURL, but the ability to have your wallet do a get request and then get some information, get an invoice, and then pay that invoice, as opposed to scanning, which means you can remove that need for the screen. So that was very interesting. So, and I'll come back to that in a bit. But the after I had the e-paper display, the microcontroller, I then connected a keypad. I was like, okay, so now if I connect a cheap little 50p keypad with numbers on, I can type in an amount, and then when I press hashtag, it will request an invoice for that amount, then display that amount on the little screen. So I'm like, cool, I've made a point of sale. So then it was a case of figuring out the best box to put that point of sale in. and trying to figure out a way of getting as cheap as possible. Eventually, I think I managed to get that whole. So that's called the project. If anyone's interested, it's on my GitHub, ArcBTC on GitHub, and the repo is called The Quickening, and it's under $15 Bitcoin point of sale you can make. And use in the wild. It works, but I also wanted like a more out of the box solution, so something people didn't have to kind of put together themselves. And M5 Stack, which is a company who kind of package these microcontrollers in nice little form factors like this. So this is basically an ESP32. You can probably see it in the back. There's an ESP32, and there's a little screen, and there's some buttons. Okay, this is all the hardware which I was using, but it's kind of packaged in this nice little product. Well, they do this thing called Faces Kit, where you get like a little keypad as well. So it's basically the same thing, but you can like attach it to this little keypad. So I could build my point of sale on this, and this is like a $50 device. Even comes with a little charging dock, and it's got a nice TFT screen as well. So part of the problem with the e-paper was, in a dark bar, for example, you couldn't really use it without an additional light. Whereas this has like a backlight, so the QR is like backlit as well, which is nice. So in the iconic bar in Berlin, Room 77, they were using my Bitcoin point of sale there in the wild for like a year, and it was doing a lot of transactions, and it worked. It worked, and that was great to see. Particularly when I went to the Lightning conference last year, and then we went to the pub afterwards, and everyone's using my little point of sale.
The year before, 2019 already.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
Because last year there was no Hack Day. Yeah, there was no conference. Sadly, yeah.
It was such a write-off, though, wasn't it? Last year, nothing seemed to happen.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. Anyway, so that was great to see. And then having it running in the wild and having it being used in a bar meant I got feedback, like really useful feedback from the bar owner, Jorg. One of the problems he had was this thing was generating invoice from his LND node. But it's a bit of a controversial subject with Bitcoins, but he had to pay his taxes, and he had to account for all these transactions and where all this money was coming from. So currently on LND, you couldn't, at that point, you couldn't export your transactions as a CSV, and it was quite hard to kind of differentiate between the different transactions, bring it into like a spreadsheet or something. So
may I ask you a question in between? How can I now export a CSV? I only know how to use Thunderhub. There I can see the transactions, but I don't know how to export them.
I don't know if it's possible still. Okay. I don't know. But the other thing I was working on for the Room 77 as well was my ATM, and which you can probably see behind me actually. If it's that one there, that's my ATM. That's basically the same as this, except instead of, buttons, I put in a coin mech. So you put a coin in, it registers how much money you've put in, and then it goes and but instead of generating an invoice to pay, obviously, it's generating the ability for you to withdraw funds using this LNURL thing, which I'll probably get into a little bit later. But the problem is with the ATM, if you have that connected to your LND node, because it has the ability to withdraw funds, it has the ability to withdraw all your funds on your node. So that's kind of scary. Like, you don't want to put your admin macaroon on one of these things and then have someone steal the ATM, steal your admin macaroon, and then take all your money. So I needed like a way of splitting into accounts. So I could have like an ATM account with, say, €100 in. And once that's depleted, I could physically add more. I could have a little piece of software which added more, but I could do it in a way which was, safe. And I also wanted the ability for when transactions came through to be able to like export to CSV and do, stuff which like a real business would find useful. So that's kind of where the idea for lnbits came from. So lnbits is an extra layer you can put on top of a funding source like an LND or C Lightning or OpenNode or LMPay or whatever the funding source may be, and you can easily make lots of little accounts and then have different amount of funds in each one of those accounts. Every one of those accounts wallets has its own API keys, so my ATM can connect to it. ask to withdraw funds. My little point of sale can like connect to it, ask for an invoice, and pay funds to it. But then I also thought it'd be quite cool to have like extensions in lnbits, which would also benefit a business. So we built all these, extra little extensions, like a little easy point of sale extension. So you could get a point of sale on your phone. It would connect to a wallet on lnbits, and you could send money to it. So effectively, by sending money to your lnbits, you're sending money to your node, and it's just an extra sort of layer of security, and being able to kind of add a little bit more functionality, kind of split up, just as like a thin layer which sits on top of a funding source. So that's kind of the whole story, I suppose, of the hardware. But I should also mention as well, as an educator, as a teacher, while I was developing all this stuff, I documented the journey, and I made a whole load of tutorials, which you can check out on the World Crypto Network. There's a playlist called BTC IoT, and on there's like 30 tutorials for all this hardware stuff and getting these things to do all sorts of, funky experiments. So, if anyone, it's a very rewarding way of learning to develop by developing on hardware, because you get a material world reward for it. You get this thing to turn on, and then you can connect it to a switch, and then that turns something on when you pay an invoice or something. So it's I find that much more rewarding than just developing Bitcoin stuff or learning to develop in general, just on a web browser or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. I mean, on the last global Bitcoin meetup, somebody presented the Bowser wallet. Can you?
Yeah, I didn't cover that. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what is the Bowser wallet?
Right. So, going back to the idea again of giving props, I'm going to make sure that I don't leave too many people out here. But I went to Bitcoin 2019 in San Francisco, and there was no one. Like, I was used to the hack days, where there was always like a corner where you could sit on your laptop and build stuff. And there wasn't that. There was just, talks and then kind of business stands and whatever else, giving out free swag. And I thought it was important, and it's important that there's a little corner for, semi-autistic hackers to go and sit on and work on their projects. So I put a couple of tables together, and I brought a bunch of hardware kits. So I brought like 20 of the quickening hardware kits to give out to people and show people how to use. Actually, no, OpenNode did sponsor. They put some money towards that, so that was very good of them. So I was sat on this hack table, which was very ad hoc. I just sort of made it. I tell you who the first person was to come and say hello. It was Dorian Nakamoto. He came and said hello. So we were the first at the conference.
Okay.
Now he was paid to be there, I think, so people could take pictures of him.
Okay, that's the guy that Newsweek told that he would be Satoshi Nakamoto, which is not true. Yeah. Okay.
Which is not true anyway. But the way he watched him play, so the way he disproves the fact he's Satoshi Nakamoto is he's not a good developer, and he's a sort of bumbling fool and blah blah blah. I actually spoke to him for like 2 hours. We got on really well. Mm-hmm. And in a previous life, he worked on telephony stuff, like answer phone software for answer phones and things. And after that conversation with him, because we were really early, everyone else was like dribbling in, and we were there like an hour before it started, and then the first hour in, so people were getting there slow. And after speaking to him for a few hours, I was like, this guy could be Satoshi. Like, totally, he could. He had all the right skills, and he kept playing himself down, but he was much brighter than he was letting on. He's really interested in the hardware stuff. Anyway, so that was pretty cool. So as a side note, but at that Bitcoin 2019, I also met Stepan Snigarov, who's the same. He wants to sit in the corner and build stuff, and he makes the Spectre wallet, so he's really interested in hardware. At that point, he hadn't made Spectre wallet, but he was working on building towards making Spectre wallet. He was really interested in the ESP32, which I was using for my point of sale. And I use for pretty much all my stuff, actually. It's a really good little microcontroller. And over those couple of days, he helped me hack together a watch-only wallet. So you could, have an XPub on an ESP32 and then generate fresh addresses on this ESP32. Which is really cool. I mean, I say he helped me. He made a watch-only wallet, and I sat next to him, just encouraging him, giving him coffee.
I've seen him also on the Hack Day and also listened to his talk. He's a very clever guy. Yeah,
he's he was before working in Bitcoin, he was a quantum physicist. Mm-hmm. So legitimately, he's a professor in in university. So we're very lucky to have him. Not only for the hardware wallet stuff, but for also letting to lie all this FUD around quantum computers destroying Bitcoin. He's the person to go to if you want to get any info on that. So he helped me develop the watch only wallet. I then managed to get the watch only wallet to print out to the e-paper screen, which was quite cool because you could plug the watch only wallet hardware wallet in, and it would generate an invoice on the e-paper screen. Then you could unplug it, but the invoice would, sorry, not the invoice, but in Lightning mode, the address, the Bitcoin address. When you unplugged it, the Bitcoin address would remain on the e-paper screen. So that's kind of an interesting concept. You could just turn something on and then get this address, a fresh address, and then it would stay on the e-paper screen. But obviously I want to turn that into a proper Bitcoin wallet. After a while, Stepan released a really good library for a C library, which I could use in Arduino for this, programming this little ESP32 microcontroller thingy. And I was able to get it working on, on one of these things. But I was like, okay, I wanted to have kind of a gimmick. So it wasn't just a Bitcoin wallet. Because I think one of the best things about these things is that off the shelf, you're not subject to the supply chain attack. If the factory which are making Trezors or Ledgers or whatever, they know they're going to be hardware wallets, but the factory making these things, they don't know they're going to be hardware wallets. So it's almost in disguise, just as it is off the shelf. So I thought it'd be quite cool if you could improve the disguise even more so I put a little game on it, a little Tetris game. So when you turn it on, you can play a little Tetris game. But if when you turn it on, you press the C button within a couple of seconds, it then prompts you to input a key. You input a key, and then after you input that key, you then have access to a Bitcoin wallet, where you can sign transactions and, generate addresses and do all that stuff you can do on
how
Bitcoin
can you import the key?
So I use an SD card, actually. I like the air gap cold card solution of using an SD card. So it's literally a text file on an SD card, where you can put your key in there, and then you can import it. Or I think you can put your seed mnemonic in there and then import it. And then you can also pass commands as well. So if you want to reset, I think you just literally type reset in all capitals in this text file, plug it into this, and then it will trigger a reset. So someone could do that and reset your device. But the idea is if you had to cross border lines and you wanted to take some Bitcoin with you in a disguised way, if you were stopped, you could say, well, this is just a little Tetris game I'm using to play on the way, and then actually it's got your Bitcoin in. Obviously it's a DIY project, so please, anyone who puts Bitcoin on one of these things, make sure you can also restore that mnemonic, that seed, and get your funds some other way than just using that device, because that's not really recommended. And probably don't use it for too much money, but for a few £1,000s or euros or something, then it's I think it's a fair thing to use. And in the future as well, I'll add some multi-sig support. So that's when these things really do become useful. Mm-hmm. And Stepan has spoken a lot about this. If you have hardware which is the factory who's making it knows that it's going to become a Bitcoin hardware wallet device, then there could be something malicious in there. Whereas if you combine it with a multi-sig device, which isn't subject to that supply chain attack, then your Bitcoin wallet then isn't subject to supply chain attack, even though you're using the secure element. So you're using a secure element in a nice professionally designed Bitcoin wallet, hardware wallet, but you're also using an off-the-shelf device. That's when it becomes quite powerful. So it'd be nice to see the project develop in that direction as well. But I made that and then just put it out there during lockdown, beginning of this year. And it's pretty cool. People made them. They enjoyed it. I need to go back and go back to the project and add more functionality to it at some point. But contributors are always welcome. As I said, ARC BTC on GitHub. But yeah, I can't list all the projects which I've put out because there's so many and I kind of forget them. But if you go on there, you'll be able to, and they've all got video tutorials as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found the Bowser wallet demo very interesting, and also the idea to distract the border guys with a game is phenomenal, And
well, we quite like the idea. These microcontrollers are powerful things, and we were talking about in IoT devices like your IoT light bulb or whatever, quite often you've got a little microcontroller in there. And, if push came to shove and it was like a apocalypse type scenario where you needed to make hardware wallets for some reason, you could go and you could smash all these IoT devices open and you could turn all the little microcontrollers into Bitcoin hardware wallets. So
okay,
it's quite a fun idea. But just the idea of making as many things as you can into Bitcoin hardware wallets is quite interesting. And when you make it free and open source and DIY, and you build like a developer community, just hobbyist developer community, maker community around making hardware wallets, you have all this weird innovation. Then like my decoy thing, a professional company's not going to come up with like a decoy hardware wallet. Someone might find that useful, like the e-paper thing for the watch only wallet. Like that could be some really useful functionality for someone in some scenario. So you open it up then to the innovation of the masses, which I think is lacking currently in the hardware wallet scene. So it's great to see more hardware wallets, DIY hardware wallets coming out. And I imagine, this year or next year we'll have like a cottage industry of very functional, secure hardware wallets for like under $10.
Wow.
I can imagine that becoming a thing, which would be great because then more people will have access to them and use them.
Yes, of course. Also, like thinking about people in Africa and everywhere around the world, who don't have so much money as we have. Actually, that would be a great thing. But like from the perspective of being a FOSS software developer or hardware developer, I mean, one day there will be a company coming in, taking your idea and making lots of money off it. Won't that happen?
Perhaps, I don't know. Who knows? They're welcome to, but I mean, it's still free and open source. So if they're using the software I've been working on, then if they use my code, then they're going to have to contribute it back to the community. So it will benefit the free and open source community. But yeah, I mean, I don't think you'll have big. I think that the days of a company like Trezor making money hand over fist by selling very cheap hardware for a high price tag because it's like specialist Bitcoin hardware, I think that's kind of come to an end. And I have heard that within the industry, a lot of these companies are diversifying because they know that the good times are kind of over, that this hardware isn't expensive and they're not that hard to make, so it is possible to have very functional, cheap hardware wallets, and I imagine a cottage industry of people. So like Crypto Cloaks, the guy who makes the company which makes the boxes for nodes, that sort of stuff. Like people making them just in their garages. Well, this little industry of people producers making these things will happen as opposed to big companies, I think. But then also we'll see big companies innovating. That was quite interesting, was the Blockstream Jade, because they've basically used the same hardware I used for their wallet. And there we are as well. Going back to Bitcoin 2019, in fact, one of the people I gave that point of sale kit to, which I spoke about the keypad, the paper screen, and showed how to use it, was a guy called Ken Cedric, and he's the guy who then went on to use that hardware to make the Lethe kit, Blockchain Commons hardware wallet. Well, it's like a box which you can use like crypto tools in, so you can use it as a hardware wallet, but it's not specifically a hardware wallet. So it's very, it's fun to like put stuff out there and then see what comes back, like what people make with it. But then I think it's really important to kind of give each other props, and say, thanks for that contribution. So yeah, but it's fun. That Bitcoin 2019 San Francisco conference, a lot of good things seem to come out of it, and I think it was just, this is, if you need to step out into the community and start communicating with people, try and go to when it, peacetime, when it's conferences are a thing again. It's if you can, like, get yourself to a conference, get yourself to a meetup, start working with people on things, start getting something in the wild, software, hardware, and then it all just like snowballs from there, and then you're never short of a good idea ever again, because it's, people working on good ideas from your software or hardware, so it's great to kind of see interesting things come back from putting stuff out there, and also being part of that conversation, for the greater good.
That's true, yeah. And I think you also have done a lot of work in the software department, let's say it like that. And one of the results is the Nostra protocol, Nostra. Nostra? I don't
Yeah,
know
well,
how
I
you
mean,
say it.
I can't take credit for that. That's Fiat Jeff. Me and there's this developer called Fiat Jeff, and we seem to have some sort of I don't know. We seem to have some sort of like connection. I think we have, even though we have politically very different outlooks on the world, I think we have a similar kind of interests when it comes to software solutions, hardware solutions, because I actually with the arcade machine I spoke about before, where you could like scan a QR code and then request an invoice and pay an invoice. I was bugging George and Rutzel as well, because Christian Rutzel was into the idea. I was bugging them to kind of come up with like a protocol, come up with something formulated, and then propose it to the wider Bitcoin community. And they just didn't do it because they're both really busy. So eventually I kind of went nuts, and I sat down and I put this thing on the Bitcoin mailing list, suggesting the ability, like a standard for wallets, Lightning wallets, to, agree that they can do these get and post requests for information from, and then you could have, it would feel like a static invoice. You just have a URL and a QR code, you scan it, and then it requests an invoice. It's the same functionality we had with the arcade machine. So I wrote this thing, and then there was one person who got back to me, and that was Fiat Jeff. And Fiat Jeff was and Anton from BLW Wallet. They were working on LNURL protocol, which is essentially that. It's the ability for wallets to do a get and post request, and you can add all sorts of really interesting functionality. So, not only can you just like send money to a QR code, you can scan a QR code. Your phone does a get request to the QR code. The QR code says, send me an invoice for 1,000 satoshis. Your wallet on your phone creates an invoice for 1,000 satoshis, sends it to the thing, and then that pays it, and then boom, you get money in your wallet. So the experience for the user is you're scanning a QR code, and then suddenly you get money in your wallet, which is you're withdrawing money, you're pulling money out from that QR code. But actually, there's this like communication happening between your wallet and the service. So that's LNURL, and so that was something we both had an interest in. But similarly, when I made an extension for lnbits, because I had this idea for a decentralized, censorship-resistant marketplace, and the idea was that kind of you have a market stall of products, and then you can point those products at kind of a front of house shop client thing, and then that would list those products, and the customer could come along and buy those products. But if that thing got taken down, it would be so kind of inconsequential that it'd be very easy to kind of spin up another one and just point your products at that. And in fact, as a merchant, you could have your products pointed at lots of different of these clients, these shops. So this is kind of my idea called Diagon Alley. And I made like a very rudimentary extension for lnbits trying to explain that idea. No one else really got it, but Firjaf was like, he really liked it. So he tried to help me work on making it into a protocol, but it wasn't quite good enough. Anyway, like 6 months on, he comes out with Nostra, which he said was kind of partly influenced by Diagon Alley. That idea that you have a client-side piece of software, and then the trusted third parties, the things which you're kind of sending the data to, they're like inconsequential. Like you could take them down. It doesn't matter. You can just spin them up easily, and you can have lots of these things running and falling, and it'd be fine. You just very easily pop them up again. So, because obviously building a decentralized system is very hard. Having trusted third parties makes things a lot easier, but then the trusted third party becomes a target because it's a centralized point of failure, isn't it? But if those centralized point of failures aren't centralized, like you can take them out and it doesn't really matter, then those trusted third parties, they're inconsequential. So Nostra kind of works like that. You have the ability to send packets of information through a WebSocket to this thing, and then other people can pull that information from so it's a relay from this piece of software, this relay, which means you can make like a decentralized Twitter, for example. You can send a note, like a post, through this WebSocket to this relay, and then somebody else who's like following you can pull that note from that relay. So the way we have the accounts are set up in Nostra, the client which you're using, so your account on this decentralized Twitter, you have like a Schnorr public key and a Schnorr private key. You give your public key out to the world, and then when you make a post, you sign that post with your private key, send it to the relay. Anyone who's following your public key can pull that post, verify that it's been signed by you because they've got your public key, you can quickly make like a decentralized kind of Twitter social network thing, which I think we all agree is probably quite important and a useful thing to have. But not only can you send notes of information, you can also, that Diagon Ollie concept, you can build that on it. You could have the clients, instead of sending posts, they're sending product information, and then another client, which is like a front of house type shop thing, is pulling that product information, displaying it in a way which people can access and use it. So the relay's just like sending the information between the merchant and the buyer, the customer. But then the way I've started working on this concept. The way in which I've been working on it, the actual order is all encrypted because we're using keys. So we can encrypt the information. So the actual order, which is put in by the buyer, is encrypted. So the relay doesn't even know what it's communicating. It's just, it knows it's communicating products and feedback. And then the actual order process and the payment process is all encrypted through the relay. So it's just super exciting concept. The Nostar concept. It's actually really simple. I'm surprised someone else hasn't already thought of it and implemented it. And again, it's just cool to have laid a couple of seeds, which helped grow or fertilize this, whatever. If the seeds were already there, I imagine. But having something like Diagon Ollie kind of contribute a little bit into the formation of that idea of something like the Nostar protocol is super cool. So the thing I've been working on specifically in Nostar is the decentralized Twitter client. And I actually wanted to try and get it released today so I could shill it on your show, but it's still not quite there. I've handed it to Fiat Jaff. I've said, and he's very kindly looking through it and auditing it and making sure it all works properly and refactoring it as well, because my development skills aren't that great. So he's able to kind of make it look pretty for other developers for when they go in there. So hopefully when we launch it, it should work like Twitter. You go on there, you have an account, you send messages, you can DM people in an encrypted way, except there's no Twitter headquarters. There's just these relays which anyone can throw up.
What is a relay? I mean, I know what a web server is, but what's a relay?
So in this context, the relay is simply taking. So it has. So say if you've got Alice here, Bob here. All right. So rather than make a WebSocket between each other, like a P2P type thing, because that's always quite slow and requires people to be online and all this other stuff, you send your data to this relay in this WebSocket, and then this relay just stores the data with your public key. And then Bob comes along and says, okay, I want, the posts from this person. So his client goes and requests those posts for that public key and then just pulls it down to his client. So the relay is basically just connecting information, making a connection to you. So I should probably take it back another step. A WebSocket is just like a bi-directional pipe which you can send information through. Yeah. In a really clean way. So your client makes a connection to the relay, and you can send information back and forth really easily. And their client makes the connections to the relay and can send information back and forth really easily. So what it means is actually, if you're both live, and then one of you, writes a post, then it just goes boop boop, and Bob, it just appears in his, list of posts, just his Twitter feed or whatever. But if if one of them's offline, and then comes back online, then their client would just go and fetch the most recent posts. It's just kind of like how Twitter works.
So it's a little bit also like podcasting works, because podcast players pull the new episodes from the RSS feed to their clients.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I haven't mentioned this because I don't know nearly enough about it, but a few people are really interested in lnbits for podcasting. Like, I can't remember the name of the guy, like one of the main guys who innovated in podcasting.
Adam Curry.
Actually, that's it. Yeah, he's been working on podcasting 2.0.
Yeah.
And integrating Bitcoin and stuff.
Exactly. My podcast is on that podcasting 2.0. It's the Sphinx app is doing this.
Oh, Sphinx.
Sphinx,
Oh,
yeah.
nice. Yeah.
And there are, I guess, like 40 or 50 podcasts now on the Sphinx Chat Tribes site. So, you can use that with the Sphinx app. So you can...
Yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah, but I mean, you need a Lightning node for it to work as a podcaster and also as a guest. So, like... Yeah, to use the Sphinx app. But
yeah, this is where we were. I mean, because Sphinx is brilliant. Because again, you can have a decentralized Twitter type thing on Sphinx, can't you?
Yeah. It's a chat app. Yeah.
Yeah. But there is the requirement of having the Lightning node, which
exactly
we think is probably a little bit too heavy for a lot of people. So, I give people lots of options, lots of choices. Some people can use, something like Sphinx. Other people could use something like Nostar. But he popped in on the. I don't know if he's still interested, but Adam Corey popped in on the lnbits Telegram chat and started asking about podcasting. And I was like, "Who's this guy asking about podcasting? Like, this is why are we interested in podcasting?" And then I realised who it was, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, probably should have been a bit more welcoming." But yeah, no, it's great to see. I mean, actually, I did a chat with, so I do like interviews and stuff on World Crypto Network as well, and I interviewed the Sphinx Chat guys, and they were great. I was really into. I really got on with them. Their heads in the exact right place, and they're producing fantastic software. So it was really great to chat to them. Got very excited about Sphinx.
And now let's get back to Nostar. When do you think that the next step will be visible? Like what's your plan or Fatjaf's plan for releasing something here?
Well, I mean, it's all free and open source stuff, isn't it? So it's a bit like Bitcoin or Lightning Network. Like, it's kind of messy, and the sausage is being made out in public. And you get to see all the gross bits before seeing the finished product. It's interesting, actually, because I think I still think Lightning Network is still kind of minimal viable product. Like, it's just only now becoming like a product you would launch as a functional, fully finished project. The Lightning Network in itself. So a lot of people had these high expectations on it, but it's because it's free and open source. It was released very early on. I still think it's people need to kind of cut a little bit of slack. It's still being developed. I mean, you could argue that of Bitcoin, up until a few years ago. But Nostar is a bit like that, really. Like, I don't know. I was thinking this with my Nostar Twitter client. I shouldn't call it that because I might get sued by Twitter. My Nostar messaging client. I was thinking, like, when should it be released? Because I had some functionality I thought about adding was the ability, because at the moment our names on this Nostar client is like a public key, which is terrible. Like, you want a handle. So I thought, well, if you've got like a Twitter handle, like I've got Ben Ark, for example, on Twitter, @BenArk is my Twitter handle. If I posted on Twitter, I'm using Nostar, this is my public key, then Nostar Network could, or my client, could see that I've posted that from my Twitter profile, claim the @BenArk handle, publish that to the rest of the relays on the Nostar network, and the proof is that I sent a tweet from that Twitter profile, and then within Nostar, I then have the same handle as what I've got in Twitter, and it's like verified and proved that it's me and not somebody else posing as me. So the functionality would be that you, when you validate that, I have @BenArk on Twitter through a Twitter post, that my Twitter client on Nostar could go and get the latest like 30 posts from that handle, and then pull it into. So for the onboarding experience, someone's literally going onto the Twitter Nostar client, generating these two keys, tweeting, like sharing it from their Twitter account, which you could even do through a button maybe, and then suddenly that Nostar Twitter client is populated with some data from your actual Twitter handle, Twitter account. So I thought that'd be a really cool, easy, smooth transition from Twitter to Nostar Twitter, but I'm not sure whether to postpone releasing it until I have that functionality, or just kind of release it and say, because I think there is value in doing both. Like, you can release something as a minimal viable product, barely working, buggy, and then you get loads of great feedback, the development process is kind of done by lots of people playing around with the software. Or on the flip side of that, by doing that, you're scaring people off. Like they join, they try and sign up, they have this big goofy handle which doesn't make sense to them because they're used to seeing like a at whatever, and they don't know how to change it to like a more readable pet name or handle. So it's like the balance, like when do you release something, you know? And I think if we're in open source, like we often just release it as soon as possible. It's really hard, like gauging, because I could release it now, you know, but I mean, again, it would scare some people off.
Yeah, I guess so too. Yeah, and the great thing I think about it is that you would have your social identity or your social profile forever. I mean, if you would exit Twitter because you don't like it anymore, now you can't take your tweets with you. But with Nostar, you can take them everywhere. That's a fantastic concept.
Absolutely, and because we're using keys like public key cryptography, we could. So one of the options, which I haven't implemented, would be that before you sign a post. So currently, on my client, your private key is kind of kept on the local storage of your browser, but it could be that to sign a post, you would need a hardware wallet. So you would say, I want to sign a post, and then it would say, send that post to your hardware wallet, and you say, do you want to sign it? You click yes, and then you sign it, you know, and then publish it. And that could be really useful for a company, for example, or, you know, quite often you think of someone like President Trump on Twitter, and you know, he came out with all sort of outrageous crap. But when we had that Twitter hack, like if those hackers hadn't been goofy kids, they could have really caused they could have affected the stability of the world by releasing a few well-timed tweets. So that's quite a scary concept. So really, probably these political leaders, they should have like a multi-sig. They shouldn't be able to just publish stuff as they want on a platform like Twitter. They should have kind of a multi-sig set up. So a couple of people would have to sign a tweet, and that would be useful from a company. If you had like an official company Twitter account, for example, you can have these multi-sig wallets signing something before you publish it and post it. So that's quite cool. You get to play with all the funky public key cryptography hacks because it's based on that. And then as well, like, so I was thinking with my Diagon Alley, the decentralized marketplace, if that were on Nostar network, the messaging between merchant and buyer would be using the same like data type as the messaging on your Twitter client. So essentially, so say if you have your Twitter client and you also have like your decentralized marketplace thing where you're selling products, you would have encrypted direct messages related to your shop, like popping up. If it was using the same account, it would be popping up in your Twitter direct messaging too, because it's using the same, you know, protocol, like part of the protocol. So that would be quite interesting as well, to have like the ability to send data through lots of different platforms, and then have it kind of, yeah, like, so you could send, you know, a Reddit post from kind of like a Nostar type Reddit thing, and then maybe because you're following the person who released that Reddit post, you automatically get a little like preview of that in your Nostar Twitter thing, you know, and you can click the read more, and then so the information isn't reliant upon because like currently, you know, like Twitter's not going to share its information with Facebook, Facebook's not going to share its information with Reddit, etc. Unless people specifically like build things to do that and cross post or whatever. Whereas this, because you're using public keys, you could have it cross post. Very easily.
So basically, finally, we could have like one client and see all the messages from all the networks we're in.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That would be
if you wanted to. I mean, if not, like say if you wanted your shop to be separate, then you just have a separate key pair, I suppose. But yeah, there's a lot of room for growth. And yeah, if anyone's interested, join us on the I think it's Telegram, you know, at me, t.me, and then it's /Nostar, NOSTR. So notes and other stuff relays. And it's been something of a sanctuary when we had all this crazy price action. Everyone, because I really hate it when my Twitter feed is just filled with charts and people talking about the price. Because I quite liked it, you know, when you get a bear market and everyone's busy getting their head down and building things and producing interesting things. And people aren't distracted by price.
Yeah.
So it's quite nice to do something which isn't Bitcoin centric during the bull run, which was the Nostar stuff. So yeah, it's great. I'm looking forward to seeing that grow and develop.
Yeah, me too. I think it's a great idea and a great concept, and I hope you will release it soon in a way that people can use it and are not frightened.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I will put the links you were telling us about your work into the show notes. People can find you on GitHub, I guess, and on Twitter at ArcBTC. No, sorry.
Ben Arc.
Ben Arc.
Ben Arc. Yeah, that's a bit confusing. I should probably have the same name on both, but again, this is why we need, a North Star.
Yeah, that's why. Exactly.
Although at the moment it's like, oh yeah, you can find me on 32Z1B. We got this crazy public key address. But yeah, no. To be honest, if you go on Twitter, Ben Arc, then the tweet which is pinned has links to my project, like some of my better projects, bigger projects, and you can then get to the GitHub that way. But yeah, if you want to go straight to the GitHub, it's ARC BTC. But yeah, if your Twitter profile is probably the best place to go. And there's also then links in the repos for all the projects to the tutorial playlist, to the tutorial videos. So you should be able to find the playlist for the YouTube tutorials that way as well.
Okay, great.
Although some of them I will need to redo at some point because obviously it's kind of a learning process. So some of them there's some improvements I need to make for some of the projects, but yeah, I should release those soon.
Okay, cool. Anything else that you want to tell our listeners?
No, not really. Just look out for the North Star stuff, and then it's not going to be fully functional out of the box. It's a protocol and free and open source software, so it's going to be minimal viable. But it doesn't cost you anything to run the software, play around with it, and give us feedback. Even if you're not a developer or a programmer, then you can download and run a piece of software on your particular device. And your particular device, it might have some little quirk which other devices don't have, and you spot some bug which other people don't spot, and you can feed that back to people. So contribute where you can, and it really helps out projects. It really helps out these free and open source projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, have a good time. And I hope there will be a Lightning Hack Day again soon, and then we will meet again, I guess.
Yeah, I hope so too. I'm not holding my breath, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's hope normality will resume soon.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers, bye.
Thanks so much for joining the Anita Posch Show today to learn more about Bitcoin. You can find the show notes for this conversation on anita.link/show. If you want to get the best stories in Bitcoin from my point of view in your mailbox, go to anita.link/weekly and subscribe. And if you have a question or just want to send me some feedback, drop me a line at hello@anitaposch.com. See you next week when it's time for the Anita Posch Show. Music, start with yes, delicate beats. Content, idea and production, Anita Posch.